Hello, and this is the first bet. Every successful investor gets interviewed about their portfolio, the wins, thesis, firms they built, but very few people drag them back to the moment before when they were still sitting on the sideline with their own money, no fund, no brand, no mandate, and wired the check anyway. And that's what we do here at the first bet. I'm Martin Tobias, and I bet three ways as a CEO, as a pre-seed investor, and also at the poker table. My guest today learned to code when he was 12 back in Belarus, spent 20 years shipping software at Google and Facebook, and then, with no MBA, no finance pedigree, no GP role, bet his own money into over 100 startups before anyone gave him a fund to manage. And 5 of them became unicorns. One of them was Instacart. He wrote that check at the seed when the grocery delivery was the punchline. He's now managing partner at Geek Ventures, currently deploying, I think, out of a $23 million fund that most VCs, it has a very different thesis around immigrant founders. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Ihar Mahaniok, welcome to First Bet.
Thank you, Martin. Really glad to be here.
Well, we've known each other for a long time. We're in a couple groups. I think we're even in a couple companies together. But what I wanted to do was to have you share with us you know, one or two of the early investments that you made, either as an angel or with this fund, where you didn't know much, but you saw something you liked, and maybe help us. We'll get to the decision frameworks that you use to make those decisions, and that's what I think listeners here are looking for, is how do you make a decision when you don't know a lot? And especially around Instacart, I don't know if you were thinking about this, but I was, before that in Webvan and a couple other things. It seemed like a category that was had a negative sentiment around VC, and yet you took the check anyway. That might be interesting to talk about. So tell me about an early check and some of the things that you wanted to, how you made the decision.
Absolutely happy to talk about Instacart. So one important thing about decision framework that it evolves and it has to evolve, right? So I invested in Instacart more than about 14 years ago, right? So, and I'm learning, and my decision framework now is different from a year ago and obviously from 14 years ago. But back then, of course, I knew about Webvan. And the key thing that stood out for me for Instacart was that it wasn't that it was similar to Webvan, but that it was similar to Uber. I already a user of Uber, and I was impressed how seamless and high quality it was. And of course, I followed the concept of gig economy. I don't remember if back then the term gig economy already existed, but it seemed to be the Uber's revolutionary approach that we will get kind of random people to be our supply of labor, to who will just do part-time jobs to drive people around. And Uber took the specifically transportation of people angle. But there's so many other things. It was clear that so many other jobs that people can do in their part-time, and delivering groceries just made sense. So especially given that it's as big or comparable, maybe bigger market than transportation, and of course, might not everybody might need a taxi, but everybody needs food, right? So it's it became clear that they apply the known marketplace dynamic that worked for Uber to a huge market. An important angle was that by the time I invested, they already operated in one neighborhood of San Francisco. I think they only had Trader Joe's at that point, maybe one more store, and anybody from one neighborhood could order. So they already shown ability to sell. They shown ability to actually deliver to their sell both on the B2B side to actual Trader Joe's, but also on B2C side to actual customers. So I
Right.
saw the potential. I saw kind of that was one of the first Uber for X companies. If you remember, there was several
Yep.
years and all the rage was to build Uber for X companies, and Instacart was very clear Uber for groceries companies back in 2012. So that's a very simple approach, and it worked, right? So and it was kind of first entrant into the food delivery market, and there were many more, but it's successful still.
So, yes, I agree. So what was different was that they were taking an asset light approach with this gig type thing, whereas prior attempts, Webvan, I think they raised a couple $100 million, and they were buying warehouses and trucks and people, and it was giant asset heavy thing. So it was a different approach. What about the team and everything? How did you meet them? How did you discover the
So
opportunity?
That was a case where I actually had less insight on the team. I knew they were in YC, and I already understood that YC is actually very good in interviewing the team. So, kind of on that particular deal, I trusted YC judgment, and just
It
to
was
be like
YC.
transparent, yeah, so that there were other companies where there was no one to rely on, right? So probably around the same time I invested in PandaDoc, they were not NYC, and that was out of my judgment on the team.
So tell us about the Panda Doc thing. What did you find interesting? And it wasn't an Uber for X. Like, what was the thing that was interesting there, and how did you meet the CEO?
So when I invested in PandaDoc, it wasn't even called PandaDoc. That it was a SaaS for salespeople for quotes, basically for back and forth for salespeople and their customers to redline quotes and contracts. And I met it was very like every interesting investment is unique in how you find it. PandaDoc was unique that the only company ever in my history that I found through an online competition, kind of online demo day, where it was also,
Oh,
I think,
interesting.
2012 or 2013. They participated in a video pitch competition, which was fully remote. For 2012, it was a big difference. It was a big thing. Zoom was not invented yet, but they participated with the video and they won the competition. And I looked at other participants and I decided to reach out to them. And I reached out to them. It was my outbound and
Outbound.
and at the same time I had people in common with them, right? So I had through few friends of mine to validate that people that founders of Pandadoc are real. There's no red flags, and I spoke with them. They were obviously less established and less senior than Instacart founders, and they were building software. So, and they were building software in the world where it was fairly early in SaaS wave, right? So obviously Salesforce already existed, but other than that, there was like not that many. I think DocuSign already existed, and
DocuSign did exist. Yeah, I was an investor. And what was PandaDoc doing that was different than
at
DocuSign?
that time they didn't deal with just signatures. They dealt with red lines and document evolving. So basically, reconciliation of contracts between vendor and the buyer, right? So it's like and quotes like this particular set of payments on the particular set of milestones, and the buyer sends back a modifications. So it was kind of a very evolved Google Docs for salespeople before signature, and then they added signatures after I invested, and then they went all the way to PandaDoc. But the idea there for me, what was critical is that this was not their first company. The founders already built an agency before. This was the first time they raised capital, and they knew how to work with B2B customers. Their previous business was between like web studio and helping people to find customers online. So it was also B2B. But this time they were trying to build something scalable. And what is important is by the time I invested, I saw that they have customers. I actually ran the competitive analysis and I found their competitor in Silicon Valley that had less ARR and wanted higher valuation. So that was and I was impressed by tenacity of the founders. And in the end, tenacity is one of the like basically important qualities. So they were creative, they were resilient, they had tenacity, and I ended up investing in this particular case based on the I like the founders, I like the space, and it was cheaper. I think it was like about 5 times cheaper on valuation than Instacart. And since then, by the way, valuation was always an input in my
Sure.
decision because in the end, upside and risk reward always takes into account the entry valuation. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think if
Okay.
Panda was valued the same as Instacart, I wouldn't have invested.
Okay. But Instacart, when you invested, had a little more traction and live customers even than
I
PandaDoc.
think the Instacart, I think the biggest difference and that when I came in the Instacart, I just got a lead commitment from Hosla. And that was the main reason. And I think Hosla gave them 20. And that was before Sequoia. Sequoia went into the next round after me. But they probably were at similar traction numbers. The difference is that I think Instacart had more to build because they were in the real world, while PandaDoc was just pure software.
And Instacart had Khosla, so that's a very positive signal as an
Yeah,
investor.
yeah, of course.
So let me ask you for both of those. You're an engineer turned investor. How much did how technical were the founders of those 2, and how much does, going into the technical approach of a company factor into your early decision?
So one interesting thing is that, I've always gravitated to a good balance of business and technical, right? So, and I've never was like focused on purely highly software technology startups, right? So I know that some engineers wouldn't invest in Instacart because it seems much more like operational in real world,
Easy.
and yeah,
Yeah.
much less technology. Of course, though, a technology to build and match everything is actually pretty complex, right? And PandaDoc itself is also like it's a product that's like more, it's like it's clear that you can write a PRD and build it if you want, right? So for me, what was always more important is that yes, it has to have some technical mode. And back in 2012, there was no vibe coding, there was no like Claude code,
Yeah.
so you actually need to go and write it. So it was important that they have written it. And even if somebody wanted to clone, let's say PandaDog, they would need like half a year or a year, right? So back then, with Instacart, to clone Instacart, you needed to do more than just code, right? So you needed to like go in real world. And so for me, going into depth and just do review their code before investing was never a key component. What is key for me is that, of course, I was important for me to understand that they have technological approach, right? Because there are some companies that try to run the whole company by like an MBA who doesn't even want to hire any
Yeah.
technologists, creates a bunch of I don't know, landing pages and a spreadsheet, and then claim that he will build a unicorn. He will not, right? Or she will
Yeah.
not, right? So that's important. But so both Instacart and Pendoc had a proper CTO with proper credentials that could talk shop with me about technology, and that was for me the more important component, right? So they have a right technical talent.
That that
That's
that they had a guy who understood hard tech, and certainly back then it was having that person was much more important than it is today. So I don't know. I know that your thesis has evolved, since then to be very immigrant focused. Did you have this idea of immigrant back then, or tell us how you added this lens of immigrant focus to your early bets over time if it wasn't part of these two?
so I had to come up with a thesis when I created Geek Ventures to differentiate the fund, right? So
I
when
see.
I was fundraising, that was the first time when the clear formulation of immigrant thesis came about. It was about 5 years ago. But before that, it was always I'm an angel investor. I'm looking at all companies and then we'll see what I like. But when I was raising for first fund, it was important for my LPs to understand what differentiates my fund from other funds. And one thing that I realized, I moved to US in 2013, and a lot of companies I invested in, including PandaDoc, including Instacart, including People AI, which became a unicorn, and I invested before YC, right? So they were all built by people who immigrated to the United States, and I realized that this is my angle, this is my advantage, and I found that if I were to focus on subset of startups, and every fund needs to focus on some subset of startups. You cannot invest in everything. And, I realized that focusing on the population which outperforms, and there is a lot of stats showing that immigrant
Yeah. Yeah.
founders outperform in the US. And at the same time, finding this amazing, there was also a question, what's your value add? How can you sell yourself to founders? I found that immigrant founders benefit the most from a value that's most natural for me. And value that's most natural for me is to help them with connections. Right? So
Yeah.
I am a network builder. I am a connector at heart. I like working with people. I know thousands of people. And whenever I invest in somebody, I try to connect them to at least dozens, maybe hundreds of people, right? Investors, angel investors, potential employees, sometimes even co-founders. So I found a C-level CRO for one of the companies I invested, and I found like several lead investors for some other companies. So, and immigrants who are less connected in US while being incredibly smart, you know, and destined for success is the where it was obvious I can help, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to clarify is like it's always help, right? So I always thought about investor being like, a non-essential aspect of a startup, right? So I only invest in a startup where I believe the startup doesn't need me. Startup will be successful anyway. I want to join because I want to be part of the success. And if I can help the success to be 10% faster, 10% bigger, great. I'd love to be helped.
Yeah. So it seems like the immigrant lens, it was something you were doing already, maybe subconsciously, but then when you had to raise capital, it turned out to be something that LPs wanted to understand. But it also sounds like it was authentic because you yourself was an immigrant. That might not be the right lens for other capital allocators to come up with if it wasn't authentic to where they came from.
It's important to be authentic, right? So it's like, and understand also to connect to the founders, right? So it's like, it's easy for me to connect to the founders. Just a few days ago, I was talking to an amazing founder, very, very established. I cannot talk in detail because we didn't close the deal with them, right? Who is dealing with much bigger funds at their seed round. They're trying to raise 15 million seed round. And we are like kind of small fish, right? So we would invest like 500,000. Right? But this founder wants to work with us because he's an immigrant, his co-founder is immigrant,
Right.
and we invest in immigrants. And we can talk same language. We have, and by language, I don't think, I mean like virtually, right? The same issues of immigrants, right? So,
Sure.
and he wants to be part of our community of immigrants and he wants to support our mission. It's like, yeah, it's amazing. And there are so many other missions that people can support, right? So that based on their lived experience on or what
Right.
they can.
So I think that's an important one that I don't think anybody I've talked to on this podcast has yet talked about, which is having an investment thesis and a value add, which is authentic, which attracts certain types of investments to you that align with that. That's something I think a lot of investors don't do. What I wanted to do is go back to those first two, the two capital allocation decisions that you made. You told us why you made the decisions. I wanted to get for the audience, what were some of the things that were the case against doing those investments at the time that were going through your mind? What were some of the people saying? Were people saying, "Oh, you're crazy, that's stupid. People have already done, grocery and it was bad." What were some of the things that were arguing against making those investments at the time? Was it other potential investments for that money? Was it, other people in your head? What were some of the things, objections, either that yourself or other people put up there that you had to get through?
So that's a very good question. And often we don't remember, like, why not the things that we invested in. Of course, I looked and I think PandaDoc I actually spent more time thinking about than Instacart because PandaDoc felt a little bit earlier and a little bit less sure. But I think what the risk reward just felt right. And I made something like 150x on PandaDoc. Right? So I
Yeah.
definitely it was the right decision for me. But I think the biggest against was that it's so early that it's hard to clearly see the moat, right? So how hard it is to duplicate it, how hard it is to
Hmm.
repeat it. Then another thing, can they actually scale? I think by the time I invested, they had, I don't know, 100K ARR or maybe 50K, something like that. They had some sales, but who knew they will go to 100 million ARR, right? So for how much they have now, probably more. And yeah, so that was the main case against is like, can they scale? But
Can
one
it be
important,
big enough?
yeah. But at the same time, I think that it's always about risk reward, but also it's about ranking and competition in your own world, right? So as I was just starting, I didn't have hundreds of startups to compete in my head with Panda. Of course,
Hmm.
there was a very simple, as I said, I only had a startup that was similar. I found similar to PandaDoc. I don't remember the name, but it was more expensive with less sales. But probably people were like more like Stanford like. But and PandaDoc won that later, right? So and I only found out obviously the result with Instacart. I think that again it was like Web1 was 10 years ago, and Instacart had a clearer moat because it's harder to just go and repeat it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, let's go try. And in the end, it's easier to say why not for companies that I didn't invest in, and almost always why not. Just basically to we simplify that I felt some other deal was better, right? It's always about competition. And right now, for example, in Geek Ventures, our approach to do about one deal a month, right? So it's not strict, but it helps us to see, like, to basically keep the bar. And we cannot suddenly do 5 deals a week. It just will not work. If we see five
Yes.
companies like a week, we will basically stack rank them and we'll try to pick one, right?
Yeah.
We could sometimes do 2 deals a month if it's absolutely, like unbelievable, but that will be an exception. It's always
Yeah.
about some sort of.
There's always opportunity cost. And at the end of the day, it comes down to which one. And the question of how big it could be or, how easy would it be for somebody to copy? That was the same question. I was an early investor in DocuSign. And the comment, it was hard to raise money because a lot of people are like, signing on your phone, Adobe could copy that in 5 seconds. Why is this a business? And that was a risk when we wrote the check in the beginning. And what they ended up doing was turning it more into a platform with the signing order and the emails and stuff like that, which were it was additional workflow on top of the core technology of signing on your phone. So many times it's going into being more of a platform. And I think that happened in Instacart. If you think grocery delivery is bad, well, it's bad if it's asset heavy, but it might be good if it's asset light. And then the question is, can you build the asset light network fast enough?
One thing that became pretty clear to me early on is that can some big tech company like Google, Adobe, or Microsoft just build that? Is not a real thing, because at least until now, until vibe coding, and it's the big companies would never go into a small thing, right? So Adobe ended up building Adobe Sign long time after, or buying, I don't even remember, long
They
time
bought
after
it.
I achieved, exit velocity, right? So, and yeah, right now there are things that, so the real thing is that when something just accidentally happens and people never, this is what happens now, right? So like, if people can use ChatGPT to just, get their answers, they will not buy your software that gives them the same answers, right? But you shouldn't be afraid that some big tech company will build exactly the clone of your product.
Hmm. No, definitely. So let's also go back to the beginning. I mean, I don't know how much your check was relative to your net worth at the time, but I think in both of those, you said the confidence came from different places. Can you tell us where the confidence came from for Instacart? It was that Khosla had given them, primarily that Khosla had given them a term sheet, or
No, I think back then I wasn't even, aware much about Khosla, track record and everything. Sequoia was much
okay,
bigger, but it was, I think, yeah, again, it was YC,
it was
and
YC.
the fact that they already had delivery, right? But yeah, I think I would. And the thing is that happy to tell a bit about like couple, 1 or 2 deals from last few years, because again, as I said, our framework evolves, right? So, and
Okay. Yeah, well, tell us about a newer one and focus on, how did you gain confidence in an environment that's very competitive or that is hard to build in?
I think the deal that I want to talk about is Cytronic, and thankfully
Okay.
the guy just did a big public launch several weeks ago, so I can finally talk about it. But we invested out of Geek Ventures about 2 years ago, sometime like 2024 July or so. And at that time, so basically we invested on a incorporation slash pitch deck stage, right?
Pitch
So
deck.
they didn't have anything besides a pitch deck, and but it was very quick to decision on our side. And there were several things. So what they're building is a network of fully automated warehouses for e-commerce fulfillment. Amazing business, I think. And they just publicly revealed they have a video, but they're operational now. Back then, it was just a vision. Let's build automated warehouses for fulfillment, for basically bring the e-commerce into the robotics world. And to me, it was like bingo, finally. And several things that came together. First of all, e-commerce as a whole is like $1 trillion business.
Yes.
Fulfillment and logistics separately is $1 trillion business, right? So it's it's just an intersection of a huge markets. And it was obvious to me for many years that all e-commerce is growing and will keep growing, right? People are buying more and more stuff from their phone. They're not going out to the malls anymore. So this will keep growing. So demand for delivery will keep growing. And at the same time, the team has already had long experience with e-commerce fulfillment. They built two companies before in this space, Ship and Air House. They have proven that they know the market in and out. They know how to sell. They know the customers they will sell to, and they know the issues. They know the issues that the typical like pre-automated, pre-robotics warehouses have. And so basically, these are, by the way, immigrants from Canada. And this was very clear case of the right people, right market, and also right time. Meaning that robotics. 5 years ago, I would be very reluctant investing in robotics, but
Okay.
2 years ago, I started like feeling like 2 3 years ago, I was like, yes, robotics is finally here. It's clear enough that you can actually put it. It's not just research thing. You can actually put it to real commerce, real business, and they proved it. Right now, they are already delivering. So it's great, right? Huge market, team with experience, using new technology at the right time of this technology is like why now? Answer was perfect, right? And yeah, so and the deal was like we got access, and we're really thankful to the founders that we got chance to invest.
Okay. So that was 2 years before, and they just launched, and now they've built their first warehouse. They have customers and they have revenue now. But at the time, it was the intersection of a bunch of big markets and an experienced team who and some new technology that would unlock an old problem in a
Yes.
new way,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
In
Okay.
general, like disruption of old markets with new technology is one of my favorite approaches, right? Of course, AI and robotics is what we invest in exclusively right now.
And why specifically on that one, and I like it, why did you get comfortable that building new warehouses? Because a lot of people, I'm sure Amazon's doing it every day in their warehouses, they're just adding robots, right? So there could be the incremental approach to upgrade the e-commerce infrastructure versus the build new. What got you confidence in the build new strategy versus the incremental? Because that's how most e-commerce people will do it, is incrementally for robotics, right?
So yeah, I think this is already a minutia of this, or like details. For me, it was here's the thing. There's like in general, I don't invest in like this many companies in the same market, right? Of course, there are some funds that do like I don't know e-commerce only or like logistics only. For us, we only have like a few bets in logistics and e-commerce, right? So for me, it was less important whether they will do new or incremental. It was more important that they are operating in a huge market and these people know what they're doing and they are applying robots. I would have backed them if they told me they are doing, modifying existing warehouses. This is a case where, especially early on, I trust founders to figure it out. And if first iteration doesn't work, you pivot and you do something else in the same space, right? So it's very, very
Okay.
important. So it's
So
like,
the team was good enough.
yeah, it's like in general, I like backing experienced founders, and a big it's basically my current framework in the last couple of years is like finding really knowledgeable founders that know this market in and out, that can explain to me how they approach it in such a way that I feel like I'm out of advice to you, right? So it's like I'm just happy to be along for the ride, right? So and also of course I still need to make my own decision on whether I believe this market is growing, right? I wouldn't
Right.
invest in a shrinking market or in a very limited market. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. So you just summarized your current thesis. What would be well, maybe that's it, but in closing, what are the sort of 2 or 3 replicatable frameworks that you use to make early decisions now that other investors or CEOs could use?
Yes. So I always, when I look at the deal, I always look at the people. And one
People.
important thing is like when we invest early, we invest in a person, in a CEO leading the company. Like for example, for me, who is the CEO, even if they have like 3 or 4 co-founders, right, is the most important thing about the company, right? And if if I don't see a clear leader, one leader, if I don't see somebody who makes this company happen, then I wouldn't invest, right? So and it's it's often about a person, right? So and by the way, I've noticed that sometimes big companies buy M&A another company just to get their CEO in house. Like
Mhm.
how Snowflake bought Niva and the guy became CEO of Snowflake, this kind of stuff, right? So it's like that sometimes this is all about one person, right? So, and I love investing in startups where it's that person is what making it happen. So, and that's why one of the my biggest my personal thing is whenever I speak to the founder, I always start with like, tell me about yourself before this company. Don't tell me about your current company. Don't pitch me what you're building. Pitch me yourself. And my what I want to come away impressed before they even talk about the company. I want to be in the situation where like, "Oh, man, I impressed so much that I want to invest in anything you're building. So now tell
Right.
me what you're building." Right? So it's like that's my favorite approach. Right. So
Okay. So a founder who's somebody, might back the whole thing. I had that experience. I was at a conference one time sitting at a table and Elon Musk happened to be at the table. And within 5 minutes, you're like, I'm going to give this guy money to do no matter what he wants to do. I didn't even know he was really Elon Musk at the time. This is like 15 years ago, right? But you meet those kind of people and that's exactly what you want to do. Okay. Well, thanks for those frameworks and I really appreciate it. Where can people find things about you? LinkedIn, Twitter, or your website?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn. I'm also somewhat on Twitter. Of course, we have a website, geek.vc. And yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn messages, probably the best. You can also send me an email. Yeah, there's also a form on our website to pitch us companies. Yeah. Thank you. I would love
Okay.
to.
Thanks, Ihar. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Martin.